life twice, and I've never even seen his face.
So Sam Raimi's Spider-Man has been out for 20 years now. Oh my gosh, what in the world happened to all the time? I'm sure that you guys growing up with this movie are also asking the same question. What happened to all the time? I remember watching this movie again last year in preparation for No Way Home.
Great, it's just some random guy.
Hello. I hope it's okay. I just came through this, just closed.
And I decided to watch it again, knowing that it's the 20th anniversary to this movie. Now, I grew up with this movie. So easily you guys could be like, oh, so you got nostalgia glasses on. No, I am being absolutely fair in this review. Or should I say retrospective, because this is going to be more of a 20 years later type of movie review. When I first saw Spider-Man, I had to be around 3 or 4, because I was born in '02 when the movie came out, and this was around the time Spider-Man 3 was coming out when I finally got access to the DVD. And I bought one of those invertible suits that, you know, they had for Spider-Man 3 where, you know, you can invert it in the black suit, invert it on the red and blue suit. I would wear the red and blue, you know, just watching Spider-Man. And I remember just watching that movie religiously. Like, it was ridiculous how much I watched that movie growing up. And then when I saw Spider-Man 2, I didn't like it as much because I was like, oh, there's not as much Spider-Man in here. Little did I know about, you know, good storytelling and stuff like that. And we will come to Spider-Man 2 at a certain point in time because it is my favorite Marvel movie of all time. But ultimately, Spider-Man is the type of movie that I honestly, if I'm being honest with a lot of people, or being honest with a lot of you, I've heard criticisms about Raimi's Spider-Man in more recent years. Mostly due to the fact that Tom Holland's Spider-Man is more, quote unquote, modern and a relatable high schooler. But what Sam Raimi crafted here is, to me, still, even after No Way Home, the definitive Spider-Man that we've gotten. I mean, sure, I would want to see Spider-Man portrayed a certain way on screen going forward, and Tom Holland does have the potential after No Way Home to get to that point now, after the whole journey that he's gone on. But what he's crafted here, for now, still has not been beaten for me personally. Spider-Man was the movie that really, if you really think about it, Batman did it, Superman did it. They did that. They made superheroes into the mainstream. But Spider-Man was the movie that was really breaking those box office records that had not been broken before, like that. It changed the superhero genre going forward if you really look at it. That and Batman Begins and stuff like that. Spider-Man has had a huge impact on Marvel movies, superhero movies going forward. It's bonkers to believe that people overlook this movie so much. But that's the way it is when movies tend to be about, you know, 2002 range and a little bit further back. People really overlook those movies. So does Spider-Man really still hold up after this time?
I don't understand.
Did you think it was coincidence? So many good things all happening for you. All for you, Norman.
Is that even a question? Yes, absolutely, it does hold up. Some elements, not so much. A lot of elements, yes, it definitely holds up. Talking about casting Tobin Mcguire as Peter Parker, this is my Peter Parker. Tobin Mcguire has always been the definitive Peter Parker to me, and has been the one that whenever I read like the comics and stuff like that, and I see Peter Parker in those, I see Toby in that, honestly. Now his Spider-Man, I think Andrew Garfield is the better actual Spider-Man, where he's in the mask and costume. He's the better actual Spider-Man, but ultimately, to have you care about him in the costume, Sam Raimi understood that you need to care about him underneath the costume. And ultimately, that's what we got. We got a very human Spider-Man story and a perfect, if you really think about it, a perfect origin story for the character. Now, the rest of the movie may not be perfect, but the origin aspect to what they did there and interweaved it into the rest of the story is just genuinely hard to think of how they could top it. We have nerdy Peter Parker. We have him trying to catch up to the bus, which, again, bus drivers kind of being a jerk, because no bus driver in the world is gonna ever like drive past a person and be a jerk along with the people bullying him. But you know, you buy it because this is a comic book world. It's very comic booky, and I will touch on that in a minute. But what Sam Raimi did with Peter Parker is that it establishes him before the powers, the way his demeanor is, the way he acts, the way he holds himself. You see all of that change as the movie goes on when he, you know, comes to terms with his powers and accepts his responsibilities later on in the movie. And so ultimately, I thought all the casting across the board was really good. James Franco, we haven't seen him in a lot of stuff recently, but seeing him back then as Harry Osborn, very good casting. Rosemary Harris as, you know, Aunt May is really, really good. The definitive Aunt May. A lot of people say, oh, the newer Aunt May is good, but let's face facts. It's because you guys are like, oh, she's hot.
Okay, tough guy.
Uncle Ben, played by Cliff Roberts. I'll tell you right now, I really, really like this Uncle Ben. A lot. Like, I really do. Like, I grew up with him. But ultimately, if you guys ask for my opinion, I do think that I really do prefer the Amazing Spider-Man Uncle Ben a little bit. But I prefer the wisdom from his Uncle Ben a bit more, because it's sowed the seeds into this Peter Parker of what he's going to become further on in this movie. The only casting decision that I can really think about that I was not a big fan of still is Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane. She's good. She's really good. And they do give her a backstory, despite what people say all the time, like, oh, she doesn't have any dimensions. She absolutely does have dimensions to her character, but at the same time, with those dimensions, the character does things that necessarily, as a person, I don't necessarily agree with. Like, how are you going to go out with Harry Osborn, but then, you know, when Spider-Man comes over, then you just want to go ahead and upside down kiss him? You see, stuff like that. Like, I know she didn't actually like Harry. It's just, you know, stuff like that. I'm just like, that makes her seems a little bit like a jerk. And, you know, that's what bothers me about this version of Mary Jane, honestly. But I'm able to let it slide due to the fact that she does play that girl next door role very, very well. And I honestly think that she shines more in Spider-Man 2. But a lot of people shine more in Spider-Man 2. But this, she fit it just fine for what the story needed, and to sow the seeds into Peter's origin as well, and leading into some of the choices that he makes later in the movie. We also had the dynamics between Harry and Peter, which, you know, can be seen as like friends, but I wouldn't go as far as to say best friends, which is why I said this movie isn't perfect, because Harry backstabs Peter a lot in this movie. Like, you know, going behind him to, you know, date Mary Jane when he knows that he has his eyes set on Mary Jane, and he's like, oh, but you never made a move.
You should know I'm crazy about her. It's just, you know, you never made a move.
You're right. I didn't.
I mean, he's not wrong, but at the same time, I'm like, Harry, that's kind of scummy of you to do. But all those iconic moments of him getting bitten by the spider, him crawling up the wall, which still has Danny Elfman's amazing music, which I'll talk to you about right now. Danny Elfman composed this movie. He composed Batman before. And you can hear a few notes in there that sound like Batman when it's a little bit more of the gothic, darker scenes. But really, this is a track that a lot of people have associated with Spider-Man for a very long time. You listen to a lot of people talk about Spider-Man, and they like use music, Spider-Man music in their videos. They use the Tobin Mcguire Spider-Man music because it is so well done, so on point with the character, that's really hard to do something that's really topped it, honestly. Like, from the moment when the opening credits open, you hear those drums, you know, like, you hear the drums, really, like, you know what you're getting yourself into. And the scene where he's crawling up the wall and the notes go as he has each hand touch the wall and stuff like that, just the music is just stands out from the typical superhero genre that we have nowadays, where it's basically copy and paste. I mean, let's be honest, with the MCU nowadays, a lot of the music is copy and paste. But Danny Elfman, if he's coming into a superhero project, he's gonna try and do his best, with the exception of Justice League. I don't know what happened there.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Also, this is one of the other Spider-Man movies where New York City feels like a presence. It feels like New York City is its own character. And that's one thing that was always well done in the comic books, is that Spider-Man is a character, his villains are characters, his friends are characters, and New York City is a character. And you get to see people's thoughts on the character. You get to see the people's perception of Spider-Man. You get to see just amazing interactions with the camera, especially where they have that moment where they're talking about how they feel about Spider-Man. It just feels like real people that they went up to and were like, in New York, and were like, hey, you know, we're doing this Spider-Man movie. Tell us what you think of this Spider-Man character. And people just give their, you know, thoughts, except the police officer. The police officer, I still have no idea what he's talking about.
Some kind of freaky Lou or something. Wackadoo.
Ultimately, that's one thing I love about New York City. Even the insane extras, which there was this one guy I just now noticed when watching this movie where he does this really hilarious pose in the Unity Festival.
Good evening.
Like what like he's doing that? Like I don't get it. Like I said, you can't control every extra in a movie. I get it. Or just, you know, the you mess with Spidey, you mess with New York guy, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, I got something for your ass. You mess with Spidey, you mess with New York.
And I'm pretty sure that's the same guy in Spider-Man 2 where he went into the burning building to save that little Asian girl. Nonetheless, those are some points that I really wanted to get across with you guys. Now we're going to touch on more story beats going on. Ultimately, after Peter gets his powers, we all know the story. He goes into the wrestling arena where he has basically, it just has this moment where he just wants to impress Mary Jane by getting a car, which ultimately he's using his powers for a selfish desire, which the movie touches on the, you know, message of responsibility and all those aspects. So he goes in there for a selfish reason. And when after his fight with Bonesaw, rest in peace Randy Savage, just amazing scene, you know, Bonesaw's ready! We all know. And I guess I can't really bring up that scene without talking about, you know, people complaining about, oh, it's homophobic, that joke that Spider-Man made. Ah.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
Oh, how dare you make fun of my life?
Yeah, well, wait, look, guys, that was 2002. It was a very different time period. We have to accept that. Other movies in previous time periods have more offensive stuff, like men hitting women and stuff like that. So, different time period. And they didn't really mean any harm from the joke. So relax, you guys. It's not homophobic. It's just meant to be, you know, just fun. And plus, Spider-Man is a jerk in the comic book. So what'd you expect? But after that moment, you know, getting into the moment where he has that moment where he decides, okay, I can stop this guy who robbed them, or I can just let him go so I can feel good about myself after they, you know, basically didn't allow me to get the money that I, you know, fought for at this point. And Peter lets him go, which ultimately goes into the consequence where Uncle Ben dies. Now, The death of Uncle Ben would not have been as effective if they did not have the conversation that they had beforehand in the car when he dropped him off to the stadium, where he gave him the, the great power comes great responsibility speech. Iconic for all the right reasons. But the last words he said to him is what impacts the scene even more, because it's like, are those the last words you really want to say to this person before they go? And that's where Peter also feels even more guilty about that moment. And ultimately, he does take Uncle Ben's message into consideration, and he runs with it, and he takes on the responsibility of being Spider-Man. Instead of making selfish decisions with his powers and stuff like that, he decides to use them for the better good. Which ultimately, I will touch on that a bit more later on, but it's essentially what worked for the character, and it's essentially the heart and soul of Spider-Man. Doing the right thing even though you may not necessarily like it, and that's even the basis of being a human, isn't it? A great message that everybody, all ages, could get across. Now, with all that being said, I'm also going to talk about things that didn't necessarily age as well. Now, the rest of the movie, after this point, the movie beforehand was fantastic. Absolutely stellar. But then it goes from stellar to good. Just good. After that point. And I'm not saying that Willem Dafoe takes away from anything, actually. Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin is the Green Goblin. His face alone, when he has the mask off, is intimidating, but that's just Willem Dafoe in general. Willem Dafoe's face in general was just creepy anyway, so yeah, he was born to play this role. And that amazing scene where he's talking to himself in the mirror after taking the performance enhancers, which, by the way, the fact that they had the villain's origins coinciding with the hero's origin, which again, like I said, it's almost like the basis of a perfect, origin story for both these characters. But diving into Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, the reason why I say he may not work for everybody is due to the fact that it's very comic booky. And this movie also has a huge level of camp to it, which a lot of people are not necessarily going to enjoy as much as other people. Especially the Green Goblin's costume. Now, that's one thing that has not aged that well. It looks very Power Ranger-y. I'm just gonna go with that. It just does not look intimidating at all. It looks really silly in the light, really, really silly. The best scenes of it, though, is when he's fighting Peter in the warehouse at the very end of the movie. But other than that, it's not really a great suit. Also, there's moments where, there's some really silly fighting or really dumb moments where kids in festivals, when the Green Goblin's attacking, just does not want to move out the way.
Come on, move, kid.
This kid, if Spider-Man didn't save him, this kid was going to get run over by traffic or something later on. But ultimately, there are a lot of camp moments, especially this one scene in particular, for me personally. Now, we could talk about all the effects not aging well, that's fine. I mean, I'll accept that. I'll take it. But the one scene to me in particular that did not age that well is... I can't say it without laughing. It's when Aunt May is praying at the bed and a Green Goblin blows up the back of her house and it says the words, "Finish it! Finish it!" And Rosemary Harris, acting along with Willem Dafoe's, cranks up to 11. And maybe not in a good way. Don't get me wrong, I love the scene. I love it. The reason why I love it is because it's hilarious.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
Deliver us! Finish it! Finish it!
Evil!
That's the thing where I said this movie isn't going to work for everybody, is because this is a superhero movie. Now, I know what you guys are going to say. Oh, no no dud, genius. Like, of course it's a superhero movie. No, I mean it. It's a legitimate superhero movie. Like, it has the campiness of a superhero movie that you would go all the way with. It has the dialogue of a really campy superhero movie that you go all the way with. And really, I think only Sam Raimi could have pulled off a movie like this, honestly. And balanced it all with well-written characters, well-rounded story, and a well-rounded world of Spider-Man. So in that regard, it still holds up. But not all of it is going to hold up for everybody. Even if you guys don't necessarily like this scene, I mean, or like this movie, or like anything about this movie has infected pop culture in ways that, you know, like the upside down kiss. Like, that is a very iconic scene that's been done in like spoofs and everything after this movie. There is so much imagery in this movie that is so iconic that people use it all the time. This has affected media going forward, much like how the comic book genre has affected things going forward too. Although I will say, shame on the people who did Kirsten Dunst's wardrobe, because boy, the early 2000s did not have no censors on nipples poking through shirts, huh? So ultimately, I will say this. Spider-Man does things that the comic book genre also does not do nowadays as well. It experiments. A lot of them are just now starting to experiment a bit more, but if you look at it for a long time, and a lot of the MCU now still is doing the same thing over and over again. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man has very own unique style to it, and it stands out from the rest of them. And yes, I know the characters when they're in high school are supposed to be high school, but they look like they're in their 30s. That poor teacher.
You were talking throughout that woman's entire presentation. Let's go talk about how we listen.
Yes, I know the dialogue is silly and campy. I know that. But also this movie gives us amazing character moments, somewhat serviceable action. The best action scene, in my opinion, still being that phenomenal scene where he's fighting Green Goblin at the end. And it also gave us a Spider-Man that a lot of people can definitely relate to, especially when it comes to Spider-Man 2. This was the movie that really hit the comic book genre going forward. Like, we had hits before, but nothing like this. And ultimately, I know this wasn't like an in-depth talk on Spider-Man, but it's just meant to be a little bit of a kind of like a talk back, looking back 20 years ago, and, you know, seeing Spider-Man through a lens of what we can see now. A lot of great scenes that I can say stand out in this movie, but the best scene to me, which felt the most Peter Parker, which is why I said Tobin Mcguire is my Peter Parker, is when this entire movie, they had been building up this Peter and Mary Jane relationship throughout the entire movie. And ultimately, he has to say no. He has to not be with MJ to keep her safe, because he realizes after the events of the Green Goblin and stuff like that, that if he's with her and people find out that he's Spider-Man, or if he, you know, Spider-Man's around her or anything like that, the ones who he cares about are the ones who are going to pay. So he can't be with Mary Jane, or at least that's what he perceives. And the movie doesn't end with him being with the girl. That's very different than what we get in a lot of comic book movies now, isn't it? It ultimately captures the character of Peter Parker very well in that moment. And it begins to show how much he's matured throughout the entire movie, and the responsibility that he's officially, like the entire movie he was Spider-Man after the origin, but that's the moment when he truly was full-on Spider-Man. And just a beautiful scene. Well done movie. Deep-rooted characters, deep lore characters. This movie was so well done. Now, I know a lot of people were like, always like, they just, it's funny how much people nitpick on very small details too, where it's like, you know, like, where did Peter get the suit from? It's a comic book movie, guys. Come on now. I know he's supposed to be like a dirt poor high schooler, and you know he's supposed to, like, you know, how can you not see the seams in his suit and stuff like that? I'm like, let me tell you something. When you guys play the Marvel Spider-Man video game, which by far is the best version of the character, hands down. When you guys play that, do you guys complain about not seeing seams in the suit when he makes the suits himself? No, you don't complain about that. So, I don't want to hear it from this. That's funny how I just went on a minute rant about a suit, which is pretty common with me. I know it may also seem like a bit all over the place with this, but this was, like I said, not meant to be something that was like a, I guess, review. It's just taking a look at Spider-Man and seeing, you know, what it was like 20 years ago. And ultimately, it's definitely one of the best Spider-Man movies. In my top 4, for sure. Definitely not all of it has aged as well, but a lot of it has aged better than a lot of movies that came out before that time and even around that time. This movie stands out from, in my opinion, like a big chunk of the MCU. And this movie defined superhero movies going forward and changed how I view movies going forward. You guys really thought I was about to end the movie video like this? No, I'm not ending the video like this without mentioning J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Are you guys nuts?
They're crap. 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 Mega crap. I'll give you $200 for all of them.
That seems a little low.
Take them somewhere else then.
What, you think I'm sort of amateur or something like that? Yeah, J.K. Simmons as Jameson is amazing. Enough said.